What's poppin', people? It's Dante. Today we're going to be discussing treating street photography as a visual diary and what that means to me and why you should give it a try. So ultimately, for the past 2.5 years, I've been treating street photography as a personal diary, as a way for me to simply snapshot my way through life and make some notes along the way. Ultimately, I believe this has been providing my life with so much more joy than before, where in the past I would go out there in the pursuit of great photographs. Now I simply live my everyday life and bring the camera for the ride and snapshot my way through my everyday routines. And here we're going to be looking at some photographs that I made during a weekend trip to Ocean City, New Jersey, where I spent my childhood actually. And so I walked around the boardwalk and spent some time with family, and I sort of just snapshot my way through the day. And we're going to be looking at some of the photographs I made. And so I'm not going to be sharing with you any crazy groundbreaking work here, but the point is this fact alone, where the photographs you make are done for the sake of making the photographs for yourself. And ultimately, I believe when you return to the essence of photography, writing with light, photography, phos meaning light, graphe meaning writing or drawing, we're not only drawing and making these instant sketches of light, but we're writing with light, where photography gives you a voice. Photography gives you a way to express yourself. And I find this to be a very empowering thought. As cliche or corny as it sounds, I believe that this is a much more interesting way to approach photography, as a simple way for you to express yourself creatively and artistically. And I think through the medium of photography, you give yourself a voice. You give yourself that empowering sort of feeling through clicking the shutter and making work. And I think that ultimately when you're out there and you're photographing, you're simply making marks in the notebook, right? You're making these simple sketches within that diary, and treating photography this way becomes a much more simplified and streamlined approach to sort of synthesizing the act of being an artist and being a photographer with your everyday life, where you're no longer burdened by photography, but you simply always have the camera with you and you're simply making pictures as you live your life. And so this has been a much more empowering way to approach photography, as I'm no longer on the hunt for my next best photo, but I know that my next photo is my best photo, meaning I enter a flow state of simply snapshotting all of the multifaceted things around me. Now I'm just simply always having the camera with me, living my everyday life, and bringing the camera for the ride. And this is why the Ricoh is the best camera for this kind of photography, where I always have it in my front right pocket. I can make snapshots out the window during my trip, and I simply treat this approach to photography very loose and simple. And I'm not trying to make perfect photographs or groundbreaking photographs, but I'm simply making photographs because I want to remember the day. I want to remember the walk I went on, by photographing the simple moments that are otherwise unnoticed. I find that this provides more meaning in my everyday life and keeps me going out there and making photographs. And so the mindset shift is all about photographing what's closest to you. It's about photographing your immediate surroundings, your family, your life, your everyday routine. And so here we have a photograph I made of my godmother, and it's a very simple photograph. However, it's very impactful and something that means something to me, where I woke up very early in the morning, and as she was sleeping, I made a snapshot and then went for my morning walk. And so ultimately, this philosophy is all about treating your life as your diary, and each photograph as a sort of page within that visual diary. And I believe that this isn't necessarily something we do for approval or any external validation or outcome, whether it be praise on social media, the gallery, the book, the zine, etc. We're not making photographs to make perfect images, but we're just using photography as a way to reflect our internal journey through life itself. And I even believe that this process can become so enriching with the way in which you just engage with your everyday life, because essentially you become so much more laser focused in the moments when you always have a camera with you, and you find that the smallest details and the smallest moments that are maybe something that is mundane and something that other people won't seem to look at with interest as a potential photograph to make, and then through making the photograph of that thing or of that moment or of these mundane situations, you simply enrich your life with more meaning and purpose and set yourself out there to make more photographs. And this to me is the ultimate goal of a photographer, is to simply make more photographs. And so as I walk along the boardwalk here, I remind myself that the autotelic approach is the best approach to street photography, meaning auto, self, telos, goal. The goal is essentially to create for the sake of creating, to make photographs because that's the goal within itself, where I'm not looking to make any great or good photographs anymore. And so the act of photographing is the reward itself. And this approach and this philosophy and this mindset, I believe that you should try to adopt when you go out there and practice your street photography, because ultimately it takes a lot of time to make a strong photograph or a good photograph. And so detaching yourself from the outcome and embracing failure openly will allow you to go out there and push yourself each and every day. And so I make photographs of everything. I make photographs as a way to remember the day, simply treating this practice as a visual diary of my day. And so the magic is within the mundane, where ultimately the most mundane situations can become the most dramatic. And I find these to be beautiful. And ultimately, like, I made this photograph of this guy, and then I started chatting with him, and he's a janitor sweeping up in this location where I remember spending my childhood. And so it's a very nostalgic space for me. And I don't necessarily, think that matters. Like, as a viewer looking at this image, it doesn't matter. But what's interesting is the photograph means more to me, because I know that with, and this is going against the grain with the way in which we look at images, right? A lot of the time you want to look at an image and have an objective standpoint on whether or not the photo is good or not without the subjectivity of it. But nowadays, with the personal diary approach, it's like, this photograph is simple, this photograph is mundane, it may not be exciting or interesting, but ultimately it means a lot more to me, simply due to the fact that the location, the place I photographed in this sort of mundane situation resonates within my soul. And I think this is the magic of street photography and making images in this sort of vein of treating it like a visual diary, is that the photographs actually become more meaningful and more impactful for you, and you, the photographer, are the ultimate viewer of the images. And so treat yourself as your ultimate audience, I think, is a really good way to think about this kind of stuff. And so when you treat yourself as the ultimate audience and you're making photographs in this personal approach and way, I have to sneeze. I just held it in. You'll simply find yourself photographing in a variety of ways that you maybe otherwise wouldn't have, where nowadays I'm turning the camera inward. And so what I mean by that is, we spend so much time photographing strangers as street photographers. We spend so much time photographing, the external. But what if I were to say, it doesn't matter what's in front of you. It doesn't matter what is happening, whether it's a fleeting moment, whether there's an interesting character, a beautiful flower, or landscape. But that photograph that you make of the thing itself is a reflection of your soul, of your internal world. And I think through the power of photography, you can create a new world in a fraction of a second. And this, to me, is the power of street photography, where it gives you a voice, writing with light. And so go out there and photograph in a way that evokes how you feel about the world, not necessarily what life is, but what life could be. And this, to me, is the power of photography. Through tapping in to your stream of consciousness, I find that this kind of photography becomes a Zen-like practice, where I'm not forcing anything, I'm not overthinking anything, I'm not using my rational mind when I'm making a photograph, but I'm simply responding to the moment, and I'm letting the chips to fall as they may. And ultimately, when I come home with these photographs, they become much more about the serendipity, the spontaneity, and that stream of consciousness is, I believe, what I'm tapping into when photographing, where I'm recognizing patterns in nature and human behavior, whether I'm looking at the light and the way that people gesture, and I'm photographing and I'm snapshotting and I'm moving, and I'm entering this flow state of being in the present moment that provides my life with this feeling of bliss and happiness. And is that such a bad thing after all? And so I find that the photographs I make reflect that joy. And ultimately, this is the goal, is to create from an abundant state, to create from a joyous state. And then after this feeling of joy, after this feeling of bliss comes through you while you're practicing your photography, each photograph becomes a piece of your soul. You can capture your soul on the streets. And I think that everything that you photograph, no matter how mundane or cliche, they become something that represents who you are, and they become a reflection of you. And this, to me, is a very empowering thought, once again, despite how cliche or, whatever it may sound like. I really believe in this notion, because anybody can become a photographer. I think it's so empowering that we all have the ability to become a photographer these days, and so I encourage you to recognize that and champion that and treat photography as a superpower, because you have this ability to go out there and to make and to create. And yeah, this is a very, empowering thing, where now we can create without pressure. When you treat photography as a simple visual diary of your personal day, you're no longer feeling the pressure of any external validation. You're no longer feeling the pressure of a deadline or a quota or something you have to make for work or something, right? This is simply, a reminder of your everyday life. This is simply a way for you to champion your life, your experiences and your interpretation of the world is ultimately what reflects in the photographs. And so this to me is the power of treating photography this way, where ultimately the most valuable viewer of your work is you. So let go of perfection, embrace imperfection, and let it flow. Enter this sort of stream of making more photos and treating photography as a visual diary of your day. And I find that by photographing this way, I stay laser focused in a Zen zone where each photograph I make, I treat it as a stream of becoming, of me evolving and changing and transforming each day. And ultimately, as you walk through life and photograph your way through life, you're changing with each click of the shutter. The day is changing, the time is changing. You're moving through life while you're photographing. And I believe that through this practice, you exist outside the passage of time, where you're only there in that present moment. And then ultimately, the photographs you make can outlive you outside of that passage of time. And this to me is a very fun sort of philosophical thought about photography, because ultimately you can't live forever, but at least you can make a photograph. And so I encourage you to go out there and to treat photography as a visual diary of your day, as a way for you to simply embrace the spirit of play with each and every click of the shutter and affirm your life with the click of the shutter, and to treat photography as a way for you to explore your soul, how you view the world, how you feel about the world around you. Don't go out there on the hunt for the next best picture, but know in the back of your head that the next photograph you make will be your next best picture, and just tap into that endless stream of clicking the shutter and moving and photographing more. And I believe you will have more joy in your everyday life as a photographer. And so I hope you enjoyed this slideshow. Very simple message today. Treat photography as a visual diary of your day. This has been a very empowering way that I've been treating my photography, liberating myself from any external pressures, detaching from the outcome, and simply photographing for the sake of photographing. So with that being said, thank you for watching today's video, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.